I think we've got no.
Is it working now?
There
Okay.
we go.
So the idea was that if systems are working together, like the discovery system and the publisher's delivery system, that perhaps you could pass some sort of persona or profile type information that would be anonymous, where like if they come from Summon, you know, somehow Summon, and they go to an Elsevier article, I could know when they come to me that they've done a whole bunch of searches on neuroscience on Summon before they came to Elsevier, and I could recommend neuroscience in my little right-hand pane or something. It was that level of personalization. It wasn't, you know, I wanted anything that would be personally identifiable. It would be nice to know if they were a graduate student or an undergraduate, that sort of thing, but mostly it's almost like search history kind of stuff that you could get in a cookie.
Did you want to? Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Sounded like some really interesting ideas. Yeah, okay.
I think it's just like the commercial. You just have to give users the power to opt in or opt out. If users say, yes, I'm releasing this information, then there will be no concerns. And I think talking about the younger generation, and more people are willing to opt in.
Okay. Oh, and there's a.
It's a comment.
It's just a comment.
Yeah.
It would be great if NISO could facilitate excuse me. It would be if NISO could facilitate conversations between libraries, vendors, and Google. That would be great. Occasionally have conversations. Anyone, any other comments before we move on to the next table? Okay. Who wants to be next? Over here. Well, the enthusiasm of the hands going up, but
Thanks.
I saw them first.
Well, we decided to go next since we had a lot of overlap with the personalization team. So this group discussed relevancy ranking in discovery systems. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. We had a lot of overlap with the previous group, so we decided we wanted to go next. We discussed relevancy ranking within discovery systems and ways that it could be improved. Basically, there's the acknowledgement that there's a lot of diverse content within discovery systems, and so serving up good, relevant results is obviously paramount to the user. We took to the term of responsive relevancy ranking, and what we meant by that was that the system should take information about the user's context and their behavior and responsibly adjust relevance based on those factors. So the way we kind of differed from the personalization discussion, I guess, is well, we started by discussing all the different things that should be factored into relevance, but then we kind of diverted from, actually collecting user data. I'll explain how. All of the discovery systems have a baseline relevancy ranking algorithm. So we tried to think about what are the other kinds of cues that the system could use to kind of customize results based on the particular user using the system. So we discussed some of the ways that's currently done in discovery systems now, as well as other search engines. So we talked about the use of usage data, basically clicks on results, on the downloads of articles, or maybe user data like ratings. We discussed user data, again, from maybe Shibboleth or other sources, where we would understand what the user's status was, their discipline, campus, borrowing history, things like that. We discussed the use of citations and how citations and links to related content might play into serving up more relevant results. We discussed kind of the best bets concept, the idea that you can kind of human index certain trigger words to serve up certain results at the top, similar to EBSCO's research starters. We discussed briefly, expert systems, or the idea that the system might prompt the user for information about themselves or what they're looking for, and then kind of ask them one or two qualifying questions, and then narrow down the results based on their responses. In all these things, we decided that there would obviously need to be some kind of way for the user to opt in or opt out. Basically, there would also need to be some form of transparency, not to overburden the user so much with the details of what's going on behind the scenes, but the user needs to be able to understand how the system is taking its information and kind of ranking the results. The user needs this in order to be able to correct course if the system is kind of leading it down the wrong path. Or basically, as was discussed in the previous discussion, get out of the information bubble. The more we talked about this, the more we kind of got bogged down into, we couldn't really define what was relevant. And there were all these different approaches, and there was no way of saying, like, there were problems with each and every one of them. What we really kind of started to focus in on was the issue of metadata. With all of this content in the system, no matter what your ranking algorithm is going to be, it's not going to be worth much if you don't have good quality metadata. And that's kind of where we kind of went with the discussion. So we discussed some of the different types of metadata that might be useful to improve ranking. So for example, we discussed, well, there are different approaches to searching. Some people search, other people like to explore and discover things. We just decided that search styles vary by discipline. That some people prefer relevance, other people prefer results to be sorted by date. So difference between oftentimes the humanities and the hard sciences. We discussed that relevance varies by source type. So articles versus videos versus special collections, all these things are kind of going to have different types of metadata that would affect their retrieval. So we decided that what probably needs to happen is that there could be some kind of extension to maybe this is where NISO comes in. There could be some kind of extension of ODI perhaps, where NISO can actually make some recommendations on what types of metadata would be useful in a discovery system for the purposes of relevance ranking. So we decided that NISO could perhaps help define resource types. What are the different types of content that goes into discovery systems? Perhaps define audience for some of these resources. We kind of had trouble with that one, but we were trying to think of, how sometimes maybe knowing whether an article is an introductory article versus a more specialized piece of content, and how that affects the user trying to find those types of things. So resource type, audience, discipline, maybe associating certain publications with disciplinary categories. There was also some discussion about maybe NISO can make recommendations about DOIs and author IDs within citations. This would help with those users who prefer citation tracking and like to kind of hunt down other works that are either cited by or cited a work that they're interested in. And all these things we also discussed were probably things that NISO couldn't do alone. These are all things that publishers would also have to play a significant role in. So there'd be more recommendations that NISO can maybe pass on to publishers for how to describe their data for the optimal use within discovery systems. And anything else that? Okay, questions?
Okay, so questions? Thoughts, comments? Okay, thank you. I think table 3, you guys had your hands up quickly. Jeff, are you the? No, you did last time. I don't know if you lost your enthusiasm. Yeah. I think you've been beat out on the enthusiasm.
Come on, guys.
All together, yeah.
And now on this side.
Can we start doing a wave around the?
Definitely time for lunch. Okay, group 3, we talked about library relevance in a world of Google Scholar and Mendeley solutions. Great discussion, wide-ranging. We were benefited by having folks from Mendeley, and people across the group interacted with the folks at Google Scholar. So what we concluded is that it's really a matter of fulfillment and delivery, not just discovery. And we liked the idea of embedded librarianship, but thinking about it in terms of these spaces. So it becomes coexistence, not trying to win or, questioning our relevance. Increasingly, we also concluded that users want something they control, not necessarily something we control, because they need portable solutions. That then begged the question, what are we doing, for who, and to what end? And so in order for us to actually do anything meaningful with that, we needed to have a deeper understanding of our users. And two of the ideas that came out, librarians should become cultural anthropologists of scholarly research and ethnographers of our users. And we also need to keep working our way up the value chain so we're not just seen as people that buy stuff. So our ideas for NISO fell into 3 areas. 1, know the users. 2, define what is library relevancy. And 3, demystify the environments of use. And so to that end, knowing the users, one idea was if we had a forum or a community-based wiki where we might capture the personas, talk about what are the tools our users are all using, and collectively contribute to that discussion, and what are their goals and perceptions, and just do that as a wide-scale community activity, and really understand all the tools they're using, not just the ones we think are library relevant, but you've got to think big and think long-term, and if you say, well, everybody uses Office, it negates the fact tools like Windows 10 integrate semantic technology within them. So those kinds of discussions, you've got to fully understand your users. Honest metrics about library relevance is under the define library relevance. Could we have rubrics around what is library relevance? Does it mean funding? Does it mean people appreciate us? What is it that we actually believe relevance is? And how could we actually go about measuring it? And then demystifying the environment of use. This was the most fun. We thought putting together a symposium where once we know those tools, you get the staff from Google Scholar, you get the staff from Mendeley, you get the staff from all these different tools that we're talking about, and you get to hear from them firsthand. So it's not a scenario, we were putting out the fact that we all talk about Google Scholar with a degree of permanence to it, and like it's a giant entity in a big company, and yes, Google has 60,000 employees, but only 2 or 3 of them work on Google Scholar. And it's a passion project, and it's not promised to be there tomorrow. So saying we'll just do it all in Google Scholar is kind of naive on our part. But what would allow the next Google Scholar to happen? And that requires you to actually have conversations with those folks, and we can do that as an industry. NISO could have a really amazing symposium then. So there you go. Yay! Yeah.
Yay! Any thoughts or comments about that? Okay.
The only thing that I noticed is that this morning when the colleague from England was showing the list of the topics that the librarians wanted to be addressed the most, the first one was collection management. So how this perspective can fit in that kind of list?
Do you want me to take that, Todd, or do you?
Or Neil, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that's.
No.
So I do think that in that list, I believe, Neil, you had on the last bullet was something about being embedded or in places where people are using things. We did a set of ethnographic studies, and when we talked to the librarians, And we said, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you wish you could spend time on and do? And they said, boy, I wish I could spend more time weeding the collection and really appreciating the collection. And so the interesting thing here, I think it gets back to our theme of who are we serving, to what end, why are we doing it? If we're serving ourselves, we might be interested in some of these things. If we're serving an audience, then we might have a different. And that's why I think putting the twist on this, that it's not about competing with these services, but embedded librarianship allows us to define a purpose around what we're doing and why we're doing it in those places. So just kind of a thought on that. Was that okay?
Any reaction to that?
My table liked it.
Just to be clear, when you said we were doing, who is we?
The industry.
The industry is, you said we are doing
Libraries.
ethnography studies.
When I've in two of the companies that I've been in. One point it was at OCLC, and now at Zafira.
Okay. Any
Lovely
other comments or
humans.
questions? Okay. Be an interesting symposium. Juliana. Juliana, we might have an idea for an event next year. Excellent. Great event ideas. I think there was excitement and enthusiasm from this group. Who's reporting? There you go.
Hi, our discussion kind of wraps in nicely with everybody else's, which is why we wanted to jump on the boat too. A few more things to add to it. We were primarily discussing the issue of non-text discovery, both in terms of using a system that is non-text based, a non-text based interface, as well as non-textual items such as videos, data sets, audio, images. And the discussion kind of centered around, first of all, what are interactive ways to find these materials other than your usual text-based interface? Currently, there really aren't any options other than the current discovery services, but other options may better serve these needs, which is why users probably go elsewhere to find these sorts of things. We discussed metadata. First of all, what is the metadata for these? How is it being used? Can the metadata that's provided support a search? And do we have enough metadata? Also, is the metadata provided for these materials being ingested into the system? Because as we struggle to catalog these unusual items, it is not helpful if it's being stripped out of a search or if it's being stripped out of the interface. Current examples that we listed that use a different type of search would be Stanford has a GIS data search where you can click on a map, find relevant articles or videos that relate to maps or a geographical location. ChemSpider, the UCSC genome browser. ArtStore is just starting to use a reverse image search. It's a metadata project. It's in its early phases. And then we also listed Shazam, which is something that can bring together, you can use Shazam to find a specific piece of music. And if we could have something like a Shazam where a user could play this, it would bring together a score, an article about that piece, the audio recordings, possible video recordings of this piece of music when a user doesn't know what the piece of music is, but they can pull it up, somewhere, or they hear it. What can NISO do to help? First of all, just even start considering discussions about alternate and interactive ways of searching, knowing who the user is, and how can we cater to that specific user. Recommendation schemes, possibly the use of unique identifiers, and how can we make those work. Asking for discussions, partnerships, interoperability between the current discovery systems and other searching systems. How can we provide what we don't know with regards to metadata? If we're having user-generated metadata, how can we make sure that this is getting into the system so our users can find what they need? Also, user-generated metadata, regardless of how official it is still enhancing any sort of resource. How can we get that data so our users can search? Make sure that the already provided metadata isn't being stripped out. we know that YouTube and Flickr technologies exist. Could there be some sort of research using an API, or how are those being used that we could incorporate into the current discovery layers, or can there be some sort of discussion or research into that? More research into crowdsourcing metadata. Is it accessible? Can it be saved if a library was to change vendor providers? What would happen to any user-generated metadata? Discussion, would that be lost? Would that be carried over? Who does it belong to in the end? And then taking the metadata and putting it into an already existing search interface. How can we make sure, again, that it's being used? The issue of portability came up, people using mobile devices. How can that possibly be used as metadata? And then the question of, should there really be a single interface? And if the idea for a discovery layer is to be a one-stop shop, is it? Is it right now a one-stop shop? And just more discussion of how, if that is really what we want it to be, opening this up and kind of running away from that text-based searching and the text-based metadata, and really finding innovative ways to make it more like a Google experience, because honestly, it's not yet being used that way, and we need to figure out how we can use it that way. So that's basically it, I think. Anybody else? No?
Okay. Actually, what I think is really interesting, even in the context of Google, you have that one search box.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to search images,
Yep.
you actually tell Google that you want to search images. It's a before or after. It's not the same service. It looks, from a user perspective, it sort of looks the same, but it really isn't. And you have to actually do something to tell Google that you want to do this thing, not that thing. I mean, I think they make it really easy. But there is a step there that people often skip over. And it's kind of a user interface issue. Just any other thoughts or comments on this? And just a question for the discovery service providers. To what extent do you capture, or are you capturing, or including user-generated tags, if at all? Any? I mean, just yes, no, maybe a little.
Yes, but it didn't work.
Yes, but it didn't work. In WorldCat, yes. Not in Discovery. Sorry. Here.
I think our experience across the industry with things like user-generated tagging or sharing, it's the same in any kind of product. In general, only a small percentage are going to do it, so it's a scaling issue. If everybody's in the same swimming pool, so say everybody in the entire library community was in one discovery service, at that point you might have the scale required to collect enough of those. If you do it at the smaller down you go, the more split apart it is, it's just really just a numbers game. So say it's 2% of your users. That's a very small number.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things we discussed is that a lot of the publishers and vendors, and we had a couple of them here at this table, were talking about that they are internally doing projects to capture user contributed data. Art Store, of course, is a big one, but the ones here were also discussing it. But their question was, if they're collecting it and they have a small user group, but very active user community in various cases, if they collect it, is there any way to feed that into the discovery systems. And so that would be my follow-on question to what you asked the discovery service providers, not just do they collect it directly themselves, but if other people make it available, is there any way to use it?
Do, let me get.
I think there, from the EBSCO perspective, there are lots of ways that we've been building out apps that help in this way. And so, for example, you mentioned Flickr. We pull in Flickr information through widgets or through apps that we've created that you can embed and you can utilize. And the same with other services that might be collecting user tags or user data, you know, the Goodreads and other kinds of things like that that we can pull in and leverage, even though it may not be native to the experience. So moving in the direction.
Did you want to say? Yeah, I did. Here.
Yeah, I think Scott's point about Goodreads is a good one because, in fact, that actually aggregates millions and millions of users, and so we've able to pull in those reviews is a good one. I did want to mention one point about the art. You mentioned art store. Sorry, you mentioned art store. I was I had the pleasure of having a tour of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and they showed us this. This user experience that they had built themselves, or they'd built with a third party, where it was sort of the idea of being able to curate images within the museum itself, and they had massive uptake on it. It was quite large. It was quite extraordinary. It was sort of a Pinterest kind of experience, and I wondered if it was just the nature of the format itself, the idea of images kind of lent itself more to that versus, say, at a book level. But it was one of those kind of astonishing moments where you see actually a lot of user uptake on something that actually didn't have in general, it wasn't millions of users. It just had really high engagement for what they were trying to do. So it could be dependent upon exactly the format or the subject matter itself.
I'm just kind of thinking, as I'm kind of thinking about this, just one particular theme. The metadata structure itself is probably system specific, but I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity to create an interchange structure for user-generated tags that's so that data can be aggregated from various systems. That might be worth thinking about. Did you guys discuss formats and the challenges of formats?
We mostly just discussed the fact that those of us that work with different formats other than text really have trouble making our resources available and discoverable. And we don't know how to do it. We just don't know how to do it. And it's just frustrating. I think we don't know how to help our end users find it. Whether that's the problem of the interface or the problem of the format or the problem of the metadata, we don't know. They just can't find it.
And to follow up, we talked about specialty search interfaces for some types of formats like GIS, but we also discussed, we say images, but there are different types of images, vector versus raster and various things. And so again, Google has a way to, when you go into the image search, to filter out by some of those formats, and other systems not so much. Data sets were also brought up as a very specific type of non-textual item that, again, format is critical, and it's just sort of a catch-all term. And users will really want to know what kind of material are they getting when they search that kind of thing. So this is where, again, specialized interfaces tend to be more useful to advanced researchers, perhaps, than a more generic keyword search.
Yeah, there's a project ongoing at the moment within the Research Data Alliance that is a registry of data types. Yeah. I'm wondering if something broader for multimedia, various types, would also be useful. Like a registry of not only entity types, so music files, but what kind of music files might be available and what are associated metadata types that are related to music, et cetera. And so like an infrastructure registry source that could provide just a place to say, okay, well, we know of these types of multimedia formats and these types of metadata are associated with them, at least so that you could have one source where you could go and say, okay, well, I'm looking for this type of information. What could the world spit back at me in that case?
Right. I just want to add from this table too that that's a lot of what we talked about. It's not so much the format, it's the ecosystem, because there's a very good, robust, consistent ecosystem for text, whether it's DOI or metadata schemas, those kind of things. And it's that ecosystem that we're looking at for those kinds of non-textual materials. So it's exactly the kind of things that you're outlining.
Okay, great. Anything else? Okay. Who's next in enthusiasm? Okay. Here we'll.
They're also close.
Close in proximity as well.
I don't know, Son? I don't know if we were enthusiastic enough. A lot of our conversation is similar to some of the conversations that you all are reporting. Our group was understanding ERMS and responsibility, or the money, across data ecosystems for improving metadata quality. The group discussed one of the things that would really help would be a true unique identifier or control number. As I think everybody knows, ISBNs don't work. Each subsequent vendor has their own unique ID and enhanced metadata. When a publisher puts their title out on different platforms, eBury, JSTOR, et cetera, they also supply unique identifiers, and keeping all of those organized and knowing which are the same and which are really different is incredibly difficult, I think, at all levels, not just at the library level. Discussed was the possibility of a NISO group to potentially create a unique control number identifier that goes with content. All of the author literature that doesn't get traditionally published was discussed, and how do we track the metadata across the data ecosystem for this. Issues of versioning, how do you say this blog is different or updated? If there's a culture of changing and adapting content over time, how do you identify what version it is? Would a registry be part of this? This kind of led us down a rabbit hole to a brief discussion of the recent copyright report on orphan works and mass digitization. Kind of a side note. And then we talked about how NISO could do a versioning standard related to ISBN or DOI. Questions included who feels ownership over the metadata and how that might create barriers to asserting CCO ownership. Is there an arrangement that could be made to share the metadata records? Added value gets put on here or there. Perhaps the beneficiary or the metadata would pay. Is there a way that the metadata can flow anywhere and no one feels as if there are free riders? Global Open Knowledge Base project, or GoKB, was discussed, trying to create the shared repository where commercial and nonprofit can contribute metadata. But of course, for these types of projects, building critical mass is key. And then, of course, the discovery services have to elect to use this data. We did not have a discovery service representative at this table. Monobase was discussed further. There must be an integration piece that adds richness. We hear it's going to be at least another 2 weeks for this. No pressure. Consistent data is the only way to do more effective collections management, but also for user access, of course. And finally, the group talked about what could NISO look, the group talked about could NISO look at the metadata and divide it up into different chunks. So critical or baseline and enhanced. This would ensure some basic metadata flowing to the CCO, and that maybe NISO, what NISO does is draw the line on, say, an element set and say this content is considered freely available and extra metadata or enhanced metadata is not. And that this might lend itself really well to the linked open data model, so that, the triples are freely available, but then any enhanced metadata could be other territory. So it kind of led to a discussion of the business model that supports linked open data and publishers and aggregators. Then we talked about perhaps NISO could start exploratory discussions with interested groups around this. Who would be responsible to create these type of ideas that we keep kind of throwing out there? Who would be responsible for ensuring quality? These are all free services. Content will get out there more and better the more consistent the metadata. But if every publisher has to tell every library, we were talking specifically about the IEEE presentation yesterday. This is how you condition your system to make it work well. That's not really a sustainable solution. And that was our discussion.
Okay, any thoughts or comments about that groups and its reporting? Sure. Oh. Simpler discussion. Is there? I stepped in that group for a little bit and was talking about this notion of CC0 metadata. So, what is a minimal set of metadata, and are the facts of a particular content object copyrightable? You know, title, author, publication date, etc. A kind of Dublin core level. If that is actually copyrightable, whether or not you can just, whether you need to assert CC0 over that corpus of facts. It was an interesting little 5-minute comment. I'm not looking for an answer, but if you have one.
I mean, I think no one's entirely sure. There are reasons in U.S. law to think it might not be copyrightable. In other countries, it might be. In the U.S., it might be until someone goes to court. So one of the purposes of CC0 is just saying, you don't need to take it to court. You know, regardless of how it works out, we are giving up the rights to this. If that makes sense.
No, it makes a certain amount of sense, but would you have to get the publisher to agree to that? On the data. Who knows? Yeah, exactly. I don't know what. I was like, we left the conversation by saying basically, we'll get a group of lawyers together, and then we decided that getting a group of lawyers together is just never a good idea.
The publisher's publishing the data. Do they have? I mean, if the publisher's not actually publishing the data, I guess some are starting to. But when your data is just, does the publisher have any rights over your data at all? Do authors typically give publishers rights over their data?
I mean, who's the source of the publication data? Anyway. Any other thoughts or comments on this before we move on? Jason? Sorry, couldn't see you behind the post.
I'm not a legal expert, but I do work for an A&I, and our business model is kind of predicated on the fact that basic metadata is not copyrightable, that we don't ask for permission to take the title and author of a publication and put it in our index. And so far as I know, in any of our organizations in our community, that has not been challenged in any way.
I think there's certainly precedence. Yeah.
Kind of a twofer comment. Of course, the Digital Public Library of America has required that all metadata be CC0 and has gotten some pushback, but not very much from the library community on that. Also, they just released today their final report on rights statements. And so this is another potential avenue of work to see how we could apply that to both publisher metadata, but also to resources in general.
Okay. All right. Jason, were you the reporter? Here we go.
Which I found out at the very end, so we'll
King-
see how this goes.
Congratulations.
So our table was to discuss discovery system interoperability, especially with ERMSs, web, and intranet. We didn't get to web at all. We barely got to intranet, so mostly ERMS and associated systems. So we started off talking about what does interoperability mean and what does it take. And so there was the immediate technical side of things that just allowing systems to talk to each other is the relatively smallest hurdle, and there are some proprietary issues that might prevent you from communicating like information for business reasons. But then the thing that really came up was sort of a disagreement on whether it's practical to interoperate lots of different systems, whether picking and choosing from across the various sources will work or not. And we know that in the broader field outside of libraries, that picking and choosing and bringing things together is what's going on. But will that work in libraries? Practically, we commonly have challenges in making that happen. So there was some discussion of that. The idea that the more different systems we try to interoperate, the harder the task. So maybe there's a trend toward merging library management systems and ERMSs. So if you add ERMS on top of your OpenURL knowledge base on top of your discovery list, and the more different ones you have, the harder it is. So it's maybe some merging there, and that theme will come back. But ultimately, we found in the discussion at the table, at least, that the crux of interoperability is still around the knowledge base. That syncing of knowledge bases is really hard. A couple reasons: because there's no standardizations of the names of resources, nor necessarily are publishers who are providing lists of their content following underlying rules that would make them report those in the same way. But there's also difficulty because major vendors' knowledge bases are structured differently. So to some extent then we had a call for a common language. Well, should we find some way to make sure that collections are named in a way that we know that this name refers to that thing, and if we go over to that other knowledge database, it's the same name somehow. There was the wish for that, but it didn't seem necessarily very practical. And the idea of that would be to facilitate knowledge-based syncing, acknowledging that the ideal would be for each library to maintain just one list of those resources, one knowledge base, or even for the entire library community to have one shared knowledge base. And of course, that discussion's been on and off in the past. Practicality of it I think is questionable, but still there is a lot of frustration around that challenge. And one question then was, is the knowledge base a commodity, or could a vendor put it out there potentially as open access? So there's GoKB that's out there doing that kind of on their own, but without the support of a strong, well-funded organization to be behind it. And so I think that I think we talked a little bit about that. 5 years ago, the knowledge base was the be-all, end-all. That was what distinguished some of these companies from each other, and I think that's becoming less the case as we move forward. And so maybe there is a place for that. One suggestion was the knowledge bases are now more for knowledge management than for access management. And that maybe there's two sides of that. The ERMS is being what you should have versus the OpenURL knowledge base being what you actually have access to, and that there's a tension in libraries between wanting to maintain both of those lists. It's important not to just trust one over the other, but you need to be able to work with both because immediate access matters, all right? It matters to our users. And we also said that OpenURL, actually, I'll hold off on that. We dove into the depths of the extent of the problem of maintaining knowledge bases. It's just really hard. It's been hard for a long time. Keeping them accurate is not a lot easier than it ever was, and seems to some extent to be just a constant pursuit that we're never going to actually accomplish. And so one thought there, which would lead to a suggestion from NISO, was that the idea of harvesting information or access directly from the authenticated user. So if you're an authenticated user, you have controls over what your access is. If your list that goes into your knowledge base reflected what you actually had access to at any given point, that would be preferable to the way that we're managing knowledge bases now. So to some extent, direct linking is taken off in discovery service discovery systems. And we talked about that and the fact that that's basically because the knowledge base and the underlying data for open URL linking didn't prove to be accurate enough to be trustworthy. And so that question of direct linking moving forward and whether that's something that can spread further and maybe should spread further as kind of a replacement to open URL. We're putting a lot of work into maintaining open URL, which we don't necessarily have to do as much for our discovery services anymore, but we still do have to do for individual databases because they still depend on it. So there's another area where we might consider pushing things forward to be helpful. And then I'll kind of come back to the user. I think is always a good way to end. You know, what if the discovery system has the ability to check the rights and present a publisher PDF, that could make a huge difference in terms of usage. So we know one observation was that if a user is looking at a list of results, they see the result that might be the most relevant, but they see another result below it that has an image of a PDF there. Watching user behavior, the user tends to go to the PDF and click that. And so what we need is for our systems to support those links or you know, as much trust for a PDF link as for other links or some other way to do that. So our two NISO possibilities, sort of recapping, harvesting access reports based on an authenticated user. What should those reports look like? Kind of a sushi for access rights. Basically following up or based on the pub-get idea they had a long time ago to try and make that happen. We still think that might be a fruitful area of work. Also a question of better support for broader implementation of direct linking. Those are our two suggestions.
Okay, good.
Hi, it's Alistair Morrison from Elsevier. First comment is amen. I think we had a discussion in our table yesterday about a similar topic about separating access from resource management, and I think it's really the way we've got to go. You can do, we've tried to do this at Elsevier with sharing holdings data with discovery vendors, and it seems promising. We're still kind of in early, first year of this. It's working pretty well with OCLC, and we started doing it with Ex Libris, and hopefully ProQuest is coming along soon. It's pretty easy it should be pretty straightforward to have access and entitlement controlling discovery. And if you can detach that from resource management and purchasing and all the other things that libraries do, you can do a much better job with getting people to the resource that came alive today. Part of that's going to have to be getting away from the idea of collections. Collections really are the way we sell things. They're not the way things are. To me, a collection is an attribute of a purchase, not of a book or of a journal. I know there's probably cases where it doesn't work that way, but it gets pretty complicated. Like one thing that came up, I know in the KBART 2 discussion that didn't actually go into the guideline was what do you do with a journal that is partially open access? Some of the articles are OA and some aren't. How do you indicate that? I mean, the best idea we ever came up with was, well, we'll flag it somehow, and there'll be an API, and you can ask us if you have access to that article. There's not an easy solution, but if you had to, if you want to do all the other things too, and connect that with your purchasing, et cetera, it's too thorny. So.
Any other? Juliana? Yes. I think we have one more table to report. Thank you, Jason. And our final table?
We were the live stream table, and I guess it's the joy of going last because I know you're all looking for lunch, so I get to keep this really short, and I won't try and talk very much. Well, I'm kind of concerned. My groups keep saying, you're the one who likes to talk a lot, so I'll take the notes and you talk. I'm a little concerned. We talked about user interfaces, and our conversation went in a lot of different directions, and we're very fortunate. It kind of coalesced because we had some programmers. We have an institution that has a user experience director, which I found was an interesting option. We have some very small institutions, and we had some vendors. So we got some very different good inputs. One of the things that came off of the live stream was we want vendors to tell us how they're doing their relevancy rankings, and I said that's probably not going to happen because that's proprietary information. And that kind of took us along the direction that how do we lay out the screens? How do we return the results? How are results organized? I want to know what I want to know, and I want to know what I need to know, even if I don't know I need to know it. Yeah, that makes, so we brought in that serendipitous idea versus as well as the find the known items. And we looked at, somebody had mentioned there's a lot of studies out there. There's a lot of usability studies. Somebody had mentioned they had actually tracked user reaction while they're doing searches, looking at screen displays, looking at eye movement, facial expressions. And one of the comments was, yes, there is a lot of stuff out there, but a lot of us don't have the time and the resources to go out there and find all that stuff, to read all of it. We don't have programmers on staff that can do a lot of this editing that can be done in these discovery tools to get those results. So one of the suggestions was, well, let's look at the vendors and say, why don't you provide us with a variety of scenarios, and then we select the one we want and we go ahead and implement that. And the vendor said, wonderful, great. We don't have the resources to support multiple platforms, multiple resources, multiple directions. So that led us to the direction that, wow, wouldn't it be great if NISO created some type of sandbox or created some type of, not so much standards, but a forum so that people could come and look at and play with different ideas and different scenarios and different concepts. Because one thing that came out was we all think that the design we want is the best and that what you want is totally ridiculous. So what we would like to see, what we'd like NISO to do is bring together something that vendors could come and say, here are some of the ideas we've got, and just throw them out there so that we could play with them. We could offer feedback, and then this helps the vendors to focus their research, their resources, and their ideas so that instead of having to create 20 different scenarios, they could say, well, these are the 5 scenarios that maybe our users are going to find the most useful. These 5 scenarios are going to be the most useful for 95% of our users. And then the vendors get feedback that what we're looking for, we can give feedback to those vendors what we want, and vendors can say, here's an idea we've got, what do you think of this? And we go, yes, we love that, or no, that's not really useful for us. And ways of doing some customization, maybe not a lot, just the default, relevancy rankings always comes up as, some of us, when I work, I want users who don't want relevancy rankings. They want the most current items. Some want the most old items, or some want, I only want full text when I do my search. I only want to see results of stuff I can click on my screen and see right now. I don't want to have to go look for it because I'm lazy, because I'm a college student. So our recommendation to NISO is come up with some type of sandbox or forum or ideas so that vendors and libraries can come together and share ideas as to the direction that we want, not only on the front end, how we want to get into the information, but how we want that information returned. We talked about the F design, whether your search results should be on the left-hand side and your narrowing criteria on the right-hand side, or vice versa. So those types of designs and those types of issues that sometimes we don't think about, but our users find useful. And then we talked about how, well, Google seems to be doing it right, and the idea was, is Google doing it right because they're the first ones out there and they've convinced us that they're right? Or is it just because it's better? Because they're the standard that we measure them by, because they're just so pervasive that they've told us they're right, and we've never questioned that.
Any thoughts about that? questions, comments? Again, some really interesting potential ideas there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to... Yes. Can all of you please, again, if you didn't yesterday, haven't sent notes to Nettie yesterday, please do so. If you were one of the reporters, please send a note to notes to Nettie so that she can take care of them. Yeah, Nettie at NISO also works. There was some very interesting news while we were talking about library discovery systems. Steve, Ito, do you want to stand up and say something?
We wanted to do something special for this conference. Yeah. I wanted to announce that ProQuest has entered into a definitive agreement to acquire Ex Libris. We're all really excited about this turn of events, and our intention is to enhance the offerings of both companies, to make them more powerful, to allow them to participate more fully in the workflow of libraries and of researchers. This is new news pretty much to all of us. And what will happen is that we'll go into a regulatory review period during which the operations of the companies will remain independent and it'll be business as usual. That'll take a number of months. And on closing, I believe Ex Libris will be labeled a ProQuest company, and that company will be responsible for all the discovery and management tooling, and it'll be headed up by Madi Shem-Tov. Did I hit it?
Yeah. I just want to add that both Steve, myself, Christine are here. If you have any questions, comments, and you just want to talk about it, we'll be more than happy to discuss. But also on both websites, if you go on ProQuest, on Ex Libris, you've got frequently asked questions, blogs, and the whole thing. So feel free to contact us with any just announcement or comment you want to make.
And in deference to ProQuest Legal and our PR team, I think we'll take questions offline.
Yeah. Very live and breaking news. So with that interesting break, we will then, we have lunch again. It's in the galley. There'll be lots of interesting conversations during lunch, I'm sure. There was also an interesting, oddly timed note also regarding Biblioteca and 3M's library systems. So there was some discussion yesterday about consolidation in our industry, and there it is. So, for those of you who wanted to participate in the LibHub discussion about linked data and library and discoveries, that is again on the second floor in room 202. Unfortunately for those folks on the live stream, that's not being streamed. There are trays that you can take your lunch upstairs. That elevator is right around the corner if you missed it. And there are signs in case you missed it. That room, again, holds about 30 or 40 people. How many of you are, just to get a gauge, how many of you are interested in participating in that? So, okay, great. You'll all fit. If everyone wanted to participate, maybe we just do it in here. But so again, thanks to Atlas for supporting that conversation. So with that, we will reconvene at 1:30. So thank you. This on? The group from upstairs still isn't here, so we've sent someone to go fetch them. Not. There's a lot of really interesting conversations about linked data going on upstairs. So for those of you on the live stream, we'll be a few more minutes. Once we start seeing them filter in, we'll get started again. Okay. All right. I'm starting to see some of the people who were upstairs coming back down, and the room's filling back up. So for the rest of the afternoon, again, what we wanted to do is take this and make this an event that actually will have some tangible outcomes, hopefully, and things that we can actually move forward with. A lot of you have generated really terrific ideas about potential new work items or themes or ideas that we can pursue. And I want to take that maybe a step further during the next hour or so, hour and a bit, in terms of really what is a little bit about what NISO's process is. We won't bore you with our 45-page procedures documents. But kind of what we'd also like to do in the next hour is we've asked Scott to come back up onto the stage, not in this case representing EBSCO, but he is a member of the Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee. And so asked Scott, as a member of that committee, to speak about the committee, its work, how it has viewed the Marshall's paper, and how it will take some of the ideas that we have been discussing and move those forward. And after Scott's presentation, discussion, what we're hoping to do is kind of, rather than, we could either break out into roundtables, but I'm thinking what would be more useful is if everyone just kind of engaged in a group conversation about sort of prioritizing some of the ideas that we've been discussing, maybe getting some more ideas about things that we could do, and discuss some actual tangible next steps, things that we could walk out of this room with, and maybe in the next 3 to 6 months, the Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee can take the outputs of this meeting, the ideas generated, as well as maybe some expressions of interest and volunteerism from those of you in the room, in order to actually make these things happen. So with that, we'll pass it on to Scott, and we'll move on.
All right, welcome back after lunch, and thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I have the big word EBSCO on the screen. I thought it was interesting to start with that, but say, you know, we're here for this afternoon's conversation, at least as Todd just described it. They asked me to step in and sort of talk a little bit about the Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee and what it does and how we work and what it means to you all and us as a community. And so really taking this meeting and doing something with it, you know, as opposed to leaving here and leaving with all these wonderful ideas sitting right here at the table. What does it actually mean to move it forward? So next steps and recommendation for future work. One of the things I think is interesting. The D2D thing is relatively new to me. It's been interesting for me to have a different perspective on NISO. You know, I would, you know, sort of from afar think, well, NISO is applying standards and that must happen magically, right? Nobody's participating, and although I knew that was going on, but it just the idea of, you know, how does it actually work? And is somebody back there saying, yeah, we're going to do this and do that? It's really a community-driven thing. And so what are the things that come up to NISO? What are the things that come to D2D? All comes from those in the room and others. And so how does it work was sort of what I was asked to talk a little bit about. So I'm with NISO right now, so I just changed my hat. But I just think it's interesting, though, because really, this is what we're all here to represent. And so whether you're a vendor or a publisher or a library, I think that's the greatest thing about what we're doing here today. Coming together to sort of triangulate the thoughts and come up with something that's going to make sense. And NISO is the perfect sort of forum for that, because they can actually help us to do something about it. So I would ask that, and I thought about this, and I wasn't sure, you know, we can get into all the paperwork. I think they wanted to get down into the processes. I said, no, thanks, we're not going to do that. But why are you here today? What did you think was going to come and yesterday? What do you think was going to come of the meeting? So consider what makes you be involved in this forum. Is it about the topic of discovery? Because that's an interesting thing. Are we just here because everybody has an interest? Did the 40,000 downloads of the Marshall paper occur because this is a topic of major interest? And that could be certainly it. But is it about learning and talking about it, or is it about the larger interests and goals and being part of that dialogue to move it forward? So I think it's a little bit of both, but the latter, being part of the dialogue to move things forward, I think is how we really can affect change. So why is it unique here? You know, there are other places to go and you know, think tanks. Somebody said think tanks earlier today, and you know, the Charleston Conference and the RNL and these types of places. But what makes this different? We have a diverse group of folks in the room with different viewpoints and ideas and needs. That may not be so different, but it's the second thing. It's NISO, the ability to actually see these ideas and needs come to fruition through some kind of standardization. So we're not all trying to solve the same problem in 72 different ways. If we can funnel our efforts together and sort of streamline into some type of common lanes, we actually should be able to move things forward in a faster, better, more efficient way. So we can move on to the other things. And think about, I don't think there's any shortage of ideas coming from here. But how do we get on the same page and understand which one's a priority and really move those forward and then get some backing to actually get that done? And so one of the things I always thought was, oh, geez, the D2D committee and ODI and that kind of thing, I don't have that much time. And nobody does. But the idea of everyone sort of working together toward it, I've actually realized that it's not such a major commitment in terms of your time. It is what you get what you put into it, but you also have all sorts of help. And so we can really make some major strides together. So I kind of said this in the beginning, you know, what's NISO? When you think about NISO, what do you think? You think standards? Sure, and that's it. But what leads to that is the critical element, right? So developing standards and recommended practices, yes. I say yes, of course. But not just reacting and responding. NISO, what I've seen and what today is all about and what Marshall's paper is about and D2D is about thinking ahead. So, you know, the sort of past and present, but really we're thinking about the future. So where are we going and how do we get out in front of the issues? And how is NISO sort of helping us to get there and covering the needs and goals of the library community? And then offering the conduit for this type of thought leadership. And so this is a great example of that. And this is what struck me yesterday when Todd opened this, was about we're here to affect change. And but it's really affecting change, not from a, that's lovely, we're here to talk about it and we can have all sorts of conversations and we don't move forward, but affecting change through actionable items. Taking those nuggets, taking those things that make sense, that we gravitate toward, that are the pain points, and figuring out how to move them forward. And maybe this says it a little bit better. So it's not somebody's idea and I'm going to drive this thing and because it's me or it's a vendor or it's a publisher. It's what makes sense for us as a community, collective pain points, collective needs and goals, and move forward in the right way. So thinking about the D2D piece, you know, what is the D2D and how it's set up? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with all the inner workings of NISO. I am certainly not an expert in that, but I do understand structurally they're organized by these topic committees to bring together experts in different areas. And the D2D is really focused on issues regarding finding and distributing information by and to users. And so this is just some of the areas that D2D is tasked with looking at and considering and thinking about. And I just highlighted the three in the middle that I thought were of specific importance. Convene thought leadership meetings to incubate the standards activities. That's today, as an example. But what the committee is, though, is not a committee of, hey, we have ideas and we're going to push them forward. It's more of a group of folks that are together saying, what are the ideas and how can we help to move those forward, as opposed to the ideas coming from us. So point being, ideas come from here and what NISO takes on and what the next working group is. And, you know, ODI got a lot of play, right? There's a lot of ODIs out there. It's a big, important topic. Well, what's the next ODI? What's important? What do you care about? And how do we move that stuff forward? So I think, you know, as I consider it, maybe this is what we're all here, no matter what. It's all about the user, no matter what you do in your library. People talk about library as maybe as a preservation, you know, part of your goals and missions are about preservation. But really, in the end, it's about the user. We're here no matter what we're doing. It's about supporting that user. And that's ultimately, I think, what the mission of the D2D piece is as well, is focused on the user. And what does that mean, you know, across the areas of experience and access and usage and integrations and all the stuff that we get all passionate about and spoke about today and yesterday. But then what needs to happen upstream to reach those greater levels of, you know, interaction and benefit for the library users? And so how do we kind of, all right, we want this thing to occur. How do we go back upstream and get together to figure it out? So identify the roadblocks, potential solutions, and then how do we get there? I think part of it is creating visibility around it. Marshall asked the question yesterday of the panel if ODI was making an impact on, you know, sharing of metadata and so on. And my first response was that it certainly creates greater visibility into a topic of interest and need, to rally the troops, if you will, to start to think about it a little bit more. But then what happens is, you know, you see what you might think of competition or competitors up talking about things that are going to lead us to a greater single place. And that's what we want to be part of. And so facilitating vendor partnerships in addition to the library partnerships to actually move in a single direction. So I think why they asked me to come up here was really to say, what are you going to do about it? You know, and I think that really the idea for D2D and for me is, you know, I contribute how I contribute and as much as I can, and certain things I dive into further than others based on my interests, based on my knowledge set, based on where it may help me to be part of it. But D2D is only as strong as the contributing community. But we need to turn ideas into progress. So if we leave here today and we had some great ideas and we talked them through, but there's nothing that comes next, what's next? And that's sort of the idea. You know, what are we thinking? How are we going to make these things real? How are we going to make them actionable items? So I think Marshall's paper was a good way to sort of get this thing rolling. So there are topics and there are interests of people, and then he sort of delved into this thing further. And so we now bring more light, more visibility to it, and topics that people want to dive into. And then we get today, and then we get a little closer and down, and more refining down into some of those subject areas, some of that nitty gritty, and it takes on its little, you know, web, so that we can then say, what are the specific elements that we can actually tackle? Huge, big picture stuff, great, but what are the elements inside there that we can tackle? So the paper leads to these kinds of discussions, and they turn into specific projects or potential working groups. And from there, maybe standards or recommended practices. I say your voice, I should say our voice, our collective voice matters, but yours as an individual, or ours as an individual, mine as an individual actually matter, and they do make a difference. I ran into, it was fairly simple. It was actually referenced yesterday by Todd. We had issues where a publisher came to us as EBSCO and said, you know, what's going on with the usage of, you know, how do I know what's coming from EBSCO Discovery Service, for example, over to, you know, publisher X, and how are you bringing traffic from EBSCO to me? And what we sort of realized in some of that was, you know, some of it we can't tell, because when you look at the publisher side, they say, hey, that came from link resolver number 2. Well, the user didn't start at the link resolver. Link resolver was just a sort of a pass-through, right? But they can't see where the origin of that search was. And so based on that fundamental issue, I said, we have an issue here. And we sort of dug into a little bit and realized that somewhere in the 30 to 40, depending, % of traffic was sort of being, you couldn't tell where it originated. So I'm a publisher, and I don't know where that traffic started. I know it came from a link resolver, but from which services, which platforms? And I'm thinking that's good for publishers to know. It's certainly good for us to know, but it's great for libraries to know, to understand what's getting the usage of my full-text journals over here on this publisher side. And so I worked with someone who has more technical expertise to say, how do we bring this up to NISO? Because it sounds like an issue that might be simple to sort of solve. How do you pass on those parameters? And so we brought it up to the group and wrote up a quick little paper, and now that's something that's up for vote, as Todd mentioned yesterday. So not a difficult thing, but one that people rally around and say, yeah, that would make some sense for us to do that. Let's get the few minds in the room that's going to do that right, create a little group. Next thing you know, you solve a problem. Is it solving the world's problems? No, but we can take off little bites at a time, right? So it's really about taking that step, understanding what it is. Don't get frustrated by an issue. Figure out how you can be the solution. And then NISO can help us to do that. So your voice matters, whether you're on a committee or not. You know, you might have ideas. You know, you don't have to be on the D2D committee or the ODI committee to have something to say. You just have to have an idea. And maybe it's not you that pushes it through. maybe we rally troops around the ideas that you have. So that's why we're here today, or yesterday, to talk about these things, and NISO facilitating the discussions. And then maybe boiling it down to some of the things that, you know, might be the biggest ones to go after. Or maybe sometimes it's the lowest hanging fruit that we can, you know, take one thing off that plate. We solved the problem. But it's really about when we leave, what happens and what's the easiest, well, how can we move forward? How do we move it forward? And what I was thinking about is bringing the ideas into, you know, reality. How can we make real progress, big or small? So how do you specifically affect change? I think it's about participating. And again, your participation is what you want it to be, but be proactive about participating. What resonated with you from the discussions today? You know, some people are here and I want to be the guy who talks, and I'm going to be the, you know, I do that. But you know, a lot of folks would rather not be that. They're listening and soaking it in, but you have your ideas too. And maybe this isn't the forum for you to step up and say, hey, I think we should do this or that. But that doesn't mean, and maybe what happens is the item that you have in your mind didn't come to fruition as a discussion topic today, maybe. But you still have, and you still think it could be worthwhile. So consider what those are, and it's really easy to submit things for consideration. So I have an idea, I want to put it out there. I said it to Nettie and to others in the group, and she said, here's a sample. Here's a 2-3 page document that somebody wrote up with basically what the challenges were and what the issues were. And you know, you don't have to solve it in your paper. If it was easy to solve, you wouldn't need a group. So you need to, you know, what are the potential issues, and how do I put it out there to say, yeah, this is what's going on, and these are the issues, and maybe we can drive down a certain path. So it's easy to submit the ideas. And what I saw was people on the committee say, yeah, you know, good idea. That makes a lot of sense. And let's think it through a little bit. And now we think it's a good idea to put out to the larger community for a vote. So all the ideas are really treated the same way, no matter how they come in, you know. And when they're approved, you're not alone. So that's, I think, the key thing. I think people are scared of, at least I was anyway. I come up, I have an idea. It's like, yeah, good idea. Now you do it. No thanks, you know. So, but I'll participate in that. If everybody just sort of does their part, we build out those groups to move topics forward. And again, you know, am I the right guy to be on that group, subgroup, to talk about that thing that's a little bit more technical than I can deal with? No. But there are other people are, and we can all benefit from the idea, the thought. So, thought many hands make light work, and I think that's part of the idea. So, just leave with this. I thought this was an interesting way to say it. The community succeeds as the community proceeds, and so we're gonna reach that level of success if we decide we're gonna do that. And so take part, and you know, you'll have friends, and we'll have NISO to help us along. So, thank you. And if anybody has any questions for me, I probably don't know the answers, but I'm happy to try.
We're here to help. So thank you, Scott. It's one of the great things about, I'm usually the one doing that presentation, talking about NISO's process and procedures. I really appreciate having other people in the community talking to you all about how we do what we do and what's involved in it. One of the things that Scott mentioned in terms of how to take an idea and make it actionable. We have a fairly simple process, which is we need a proposal, which is like a page or two of that basically the topic committees can vet and look at and kind of get its hands around what the idea actually is. Like, who is it going to impact? How big is this problem? Who might be people who might want to work on this? Does it affect more than a handful of institutions? And these are the sort of things that we want to know. And if there's a prototype solution, great. What is it? But if not, that's fine. so essentially, I mean, a lot of people think that NISO is kind of a black box and don't understand the procedures and don't understand how things, all of the different pieces work. You don't have to get something off the ground. All we need to know is what's the idea and a little bit more about the idea, you know, just more than a tweet's worth of information. But it doesn't take the bar, we intentionally didn't set the bar really high. That doesn't mean that every proposal is going to get advanced, but we're happy to talk to you about how to do that. So essentially, we've got a ton of really good ideas. You know, registries of metadata elements. We've got elements of usage and how do we track usage. We've got some really interesting ideas about metadata exchange for personalization profiles that gets transferred between systems. Those are really interesting ideas generated today. How do we capture that? How do we capture those? How do we move forward with those? So to Scott's point, I mean, what did you hear today? And Juliana, if you could help me here, run around with the mic, thank you. What ideas did you hear yesterday, this morning, that really resonated with you? Like, was that an idea that would really make a huge difference? Everyone's kind of flipping. I see a bunch of people flipping through their notes. Did anyone have an idea? Yeah, great.
One of the ideas that came out of a group, I think they were this group, this afternoon was about openly available knowledge base type data or standardization. I mean, as a liaison and reference librarian, I hate going in our ERM because what I'm looking for is never what term they use. It's hard to search, and if it were more openly available with synonyms and things like that, that would be easy.
And I'm just writing these down just to capture them. So. Great. Just wait until we get the mic. There is just as many people out there who are listening as are in here, so if not more.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think if NISO actually could pull off a meeting with the major discovery vendors and Google to talk about some key issues and strategies, that would be amazing.
And to parrot that, that was part of the live stream. Somebody said that on a comment on the live stream from the user interface table.
What would you want that meeting to achieve? I mean, no, it doesn't have to be you. If we organize that meeting, what would you want the outcomes to be?
But it also can be you.
Oh, it could be.
I didn't want to exclude her.
Sorry. Okay.
That if I can steal Todd's mic and speak for some of what we were talking about at the table earlier, which was the purpose of a meeting like that would, to my mind, I think, achieve a couple of things. One is access to the different search engines is quite uneven across the industry. So being able to ask Anurag, a Google Scholar, you know, what is the motivation? What does the roadmap look like? Where are you going with this? My library is investing in Scholar. Tell me more. I think it would also give us a chance to educate one another as to what the landscape of search engines look like that are being used in libraries and what data we have about what users are doing there. I think it's both strategy and education, perhaps. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
The only thing that I might add to that is maybe we get a better sense of where Google actually is and where they're going.
Point of clarification, are we talking Google, the big company, or are we talking Google Scholar, a small piece? Because when we've had discussions with Google Scholar, they're very independent from the big company.
I would say the big company and the little company.
I'm fairly certain Google won't tell us where they're going. Scholar might. And if you're listening on Iraq. What other ideas resonated with folks? Juliana, over.
Yeah, I think in several discussions or the several table reports, metadata quality has come up. I think the discovery service cannot succeed without good data. So good quality of metadata at different levels and openly accessible at different degrees, those are important. So.
One thing that maybe not NISO, maybe ISO could really deal with is the cross-language search, which probably here is not an interest, but worldwide it is. So really, maybe not NISO, but ISO could do something.
Well, we are part of we are part of ISO,
Here.
so we can.
Switch with me.
I think.
Get new batteries. Here, you take this.
Is it a battery question or is it a muting question? Okay. We are part of ISO. We participate very actively in that community, so we certainly can engage in that forum, and I'm going to cover that up. So yeah, I mean, but I do think that there is a lot of opportunity there. We are involved in, ISO is involved in interesting conversations about transliteration, which has implications for search. So there is some work already existent there, but how that feeds into discovery is an important element that maybe we could take forward. And those members in the room who are not members of, who are not U.S. Participants, you know, organizing some international engagement on that is also useful, so that it's not just us talking to ISO. There are other people talking to ISO too. So if you need or want connections to your national representatives in TC46, let me know. Circling back to, hang on with that idea. Metadata quality. We talked a lot about metadata quality. It's kind of a running theme in this because it is a critical element in discovery. What does that look like? What does NISO work on metadata quality look like? Is it, go ahead. So, is it certification? Is it, and you just kind of circle to this actionable question. Go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to suggest that perhaps it just means, at the very least, moving from recommended practice to a standard, to defining an actual standard for metadata in a discovery system or creating records.
And by that, what do you mean? Sorry. No, I meant a recommended. Yes.
Short leg.
Actually, Devon, can you grab a mic and help so that Juliana isn't the only one running around? Maybe like divide and conquer the room. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I mean, I know that that ODI, had some elements that it recommended that providers furnish discovery, but maybe it actually has to come up with a standard similar to MARC, or as MARC was for catalogs, this would be for discovery systems. I mean, that standard could be BibFrame or it could be something else, but maybe just some way of defining what records should look like and what common metadata elements should be for all different resource types.
And this is a little bit of a nuance to that. Part of it isn't just the metadata quality that gets provided to the discovery service. It's the metadata quality once the service is provided. So how that kind of merging of records, it's the quality of the output, not just the input.
Great.
Oh, hey, Todd. Actually, on metadata, I think it should probably also address the data flows. Publishers to vendors to libraries, and libraries to vendors to users, whatever. The interesting idea I was going to bring up was Jason and I were talking about something along the lines of sushi for holdings data. So building on KBART 2 to talk about a standard, basically formalizing what Elsevier is trying to do with automated data exchange so that it can become common practice as a way for publishers to share entitlement information with knowledge base.
Could that, and just kind of, one of the things that we've been talking about with regard to data flows is, and this is related to the issue of data quality, was a lack of a feedback mechanism. Like, people are creating metadata, sending it out in the community. Other organizations are improving, enhancing, correcting, et cetera. But does that feedback to the publisher or feedback to the data provider, or, we don't have any automated way to improve the overall data quality in our community? And might a automated exchange mechanism, like a sushi for KBART, could that go both ways? So I don't expect anybody to read either my handwriting or the fact that I'm writing in maybe 6-point type. Any more ideas? If there was one thing out of this meeting that you would want us to do, which would it be?
Sushi for KBART. We have such trouble with keeping our link resolvers, making them work. I mean, I know a lot of it has to do with the fact that we buy packages that have different kinds of names, that have different, everything is so unique. But if there were some way to pass that kind of information that we could use in our link resolvers that was accurate, that would be great.
I often think of one of the lenses by which I often view standards questions or standards opportunities are pain points. Like, what are the pain points that you face in your organizations, in your day-to-day work, that suck up a tremendous amount of time, that frustrate the heck out of you, and you kind of bang your head on against the wall about? I mean, those are the sort of things that you move pretty quickly into. I'm dying again? Oh no. You know, obviously we just talked about data quality and data exchange. Got that. What else do you spend too much of your time worrying about or dealing with? Either at a vendor or at a library. You all have fantastic jobs and you're like all happy?
I was going to say, in this realm, it's missing metadata. So you're going from source A to source B, and it might have been lost in the link resolver. It might have been lost in the open URL. But it's tracking down why something didn't work, and it generally comes down to missing metadata.
I'm going to talk again. My staff, I don't do it, but my staff spend an awful lot of time putting the same information into multiple systems. You know, part of it's because we have an ERM and a link resolver from different vendors. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just pass the data back and forth? But I also have, because we're a medical library, we have to pass that information into various National Library of Medicine products, so that support interlibrary loan and access to full text within PubMed. So we end up putting the same information into multiple systems over and over again. It would be nice to have a standard that made it easier.
Yes.
How about that? One of the things we're being asked to do now at the level where we deliver articles is know the open access status and copyright CC BY, CC/CD, and are there supplementary materials at the article level? And we need that to be added to the metadata. Even better, we'd like it added consistently, someplace we can find it so that we can act on it, so we're not processing the same thing twice because we missed it until the patron said, hey, it says here there was supplementary material and I didn't get it.
We do have a standard metadata structure for open access status and license indicators. It's slowly getting rolled out into the community. So there is that element. We're in a kind of adoption phase. So pushing back on vendors who don't have that data, say, hey, we really need this. Publishers include this metadata so that we can X. That's how we affect change as a community. We start making squeaky wheel noises to publishers and expressing the need for compliance with this, and publishers do listen, so do software providers. Slowly, but they do.
I would just say that the delivery part of discovery and delivery maybe eats up the most time, troubleshooting linking problems. Okay. The delivery part of discovery and delivery is maybe eats up the most time, troubleshooting linking problems, and trying to get to about anything other than a book or journal, conference papers, technical reports, dissertations, any kind of gray literature is not well handled right now.
We have issues with scoping discovery to match what we can access, but not across the board. So in our discovery service, we want people to be able to find books and articles that we don't own because those are very easy to interlibrary loan. But we don't want them to find electronic books and streaming videos that we don't own. And it's not the way that content is ingested is usually by, here's Olive Alexander Street Press, not here are the different collections that you can turn on and off easily. So better scoping of the discovery content would be better for us.
And at Twitter, go.
So a question from Twitter. IEEE's approach of helping libraries to audit their access to things they've paid for. The question is, could NISO do that cross-platform? Audit of access rights, I think, within the discovery systems. Looks like.
Jason?
So maybe thinking in response to the configuration guide for from every publisher for every discovery vendor, turning that on its head and saying these are the top 5 most important things a library can do to affect their discovery system performance. And, you know, maybe here's how you would accomplish them, or you can or can't accomplish them in each of the major discovery service vendors. Ideally, those 5 things or 3 things or whatever they are that are most important, we would figure out what they are first. So I don't have the answer there, but I've got to kind of push back against the idea that it's going to work to have a different list about, different guide about how to do that for every single publisher's content for every single discovery vendor. I just think that will get lost and people won't use them, and that's an awful lot of work at that level, which is not to say that those that aren't doing it right now should stop, because we need to learn from them, but I think having potentially ODI could move in the direction of, and that would probably take some research as well as some then education based on how that might work. It's a kind of pie in the sky idea, but it's a reaction to something I heard and have been thinking about since yesterday.
Carol? No? Somebody over here raised their hand. There you go. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Something that was discussed at our table and about interoperability is having a standard vocabulary or a standard language, a descriptive language among systems, and standard labeling in a sense.
So, folks on the ODI group, Laura, there was a vocabulary. There's vocabulary elements that were part of ODI. So I guess what I'm my question to you, or my question to you, is what's missing? What more do we need? Or do we just need to get greater awareness about those vocabulary elements?
There were vocabulary elements, and I'm looking at Letty as well to help my memory. And I think it was just a beginning, and I think that many of them did not directly go into interoperability concerns. So I definitely think it's something that maybe we could work together and review and figure out where there are pockets that need to be addressed. But I agree that would be very useful to have more of the same language. And I also agree with Jason's earlier point that if we can get some of these guides and then see what the commonalities are, we could potentially have a set of like quick instructions that apply more universally for configuration, and then a registry so that if you're having a particular issue with, I know JSTOR has something, so instead of picking on IEEE the whole time, but you could refer more specifically to a resource-specific guide if you were having an issue with a certain vendor's content. So.
One of the things that we're exploring as an organization and trying to find resources to make happen is a fellows program. And one of the things that we're trying to do with that fellows program, or one of the ideas in order to get it off the ground, are what would we ask fellows to do in a year-long fellowship research project kind of work. This sounds like maybe something a team of really smart, motivated, early career professionals could do as part of their fellowship, gather this information, organize it in a specific way from the various different guides. Just kind of throwing it out there as a... Because one of the challenges with all of NISO's work, but not necessarily, and this idea in particular, is that takes a lot of time and effort. It's not necessarily the most challenging work in the world, but it does take a lot of time and effort. And who's got the time to do that sort of thing, you know, in a world of volunteers? So how can we find ways to get people who have interest and energy and need career advancement and experience? This might be one way to build that. So we're also looking for other ideas so that we can get teams of early career professionals engaged in NISO at an early stage in their careers and build with the community. Sorry. Some more ideas, some more problems, challenges, things that people really resonated with? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I feel like I talk so much at these things. There were a couple of great suggestions around helping one another get exposed to and sharing knowledge about user interaction and user discovery trends, information seeking trends, and it could be very specific to, you know, users in a library. It could be very broad, but I think one of the things that I've heard in the last 2 days is much like the access to different search engine stakeholders, the access to resources to, you know, be that cultural anthropologist of scholarly, you know, research is unevenly distributed. So I'm being very long-winded about this, but something around a sort of user symposium, or maybe one of those, you know, eager up-and-coming professionals wants to, you know, mine the library UX literature and pull out what are the top 10 recommendations that are coming out of, you know, those libraries with UX resources. I just think there's knowledge to be shared.
Again, it's a great idea. So it's one of the things that NISO is well positioned to do, is not just build a standard, but inform and educate the community about how these technologies work and what can we do to engage the community in better understanding them. How are we doing on, yeah, go ahead.
Just picking up on that last idea, I would say another issue with user experience is finding the time to do testing and having the resources to do testing. And then also, even if you have the time and the resources, your results not being generalizable because you've only tested with a small sample of your users. So NISO might be uniquely positioned to foster some kind of cross-institutional user testing, where many institutions could kind of do testing across different, user groups, and then kind of get a set of recommendations from that. That then could be kind of almost industry standard, or something that could be passed on to the vendors that they can follow and they can trust, like has some good support because it's been tested across the board.
And we could probably also organize, say, ODI to develop the framework for how that testing gets done. Some things that we spent some time talking about, which we haven't yet touched on, linked data and its role in discovery. There were, I think, 3 different roundtables on that. Were there ideas that really resonated with you all about the implications of linked data, the role of linked data in discovery systems, the role of libraries in creating or exchanging linked data? Did anything come? Where's Jeff? The mic isn't far away from you, Jeff.
I was interested, I brought it up in the earlier session about the role NISO might be able to play in helping shape vocabularies, or in terms of evolving BibFrame and such beyond MARC or beyond the work that any given set of groups is going through right now, to try and figure out how do we represent all of our entities, how do we represent our institutions and all of that.
Related to that, and again, I'm thinking very practical here. One of the ideas that was discussed in, I think it was Content and Collection Management, the topic committee, was getting a group of people together to try and use BibFrame or some vocabulary to express different types of content. So science library, here's a bit of their collection, or a music library, or a blah, 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 different type of institution. And I'm wondering how much of this LibHub is already done or explored.
We've done a fair amount as Zafira and whatnot, but one of the ideas that we had, be curious to see if the group's interested, is we have a whole set of transformation tools that use BibFrame, BibFrame Lite, and extended transformation rules. You could imagine a scenario where we host a data fest. Everybody comes, bring your hardest data, and we spend a couple days just mashing through what falls out, what's missing, turn it into a modeling exercise by discipline, and you walk away with working drafts of profiles for different subject areas like you were describing, Todd.
just road test that idea.
Back here behind the pole.
Sorry, just 1 second. How many of you would either participate in that conversation or send someone from your institution, or know someone at your institution who would go to that? Okay, maybe a dozen? 15? Okay. I just want to have some sense of how much energy, and maybe not necessarily this is the best group to ask that question of, but just kind of get some sense of.
And a little bit of context on what we were talking about. When we've kicked this around with different groups, the idea is we could spend a lot of time debating which thing goes where and how to do the transition, or we can actually take the data, and the outcome is make sure that this bib frame can represent me, can represent my data, and being able to put things out the other side that people can react to instead of it being theoretical. It's your actual data. That's the premise of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I was just kind of how big of a problem is that, and how much of an opportunity is it? And it was one idea that had been discussed. So, great. Go ahead.
And I really want to piggyback on what he said was, this last year at ALA, I was at a pre-conference that was along those lines, and it was like programmers speak way up here. And those of us who, I hate to work with data day in, day out, we need something we can kind of wrap our arms around, sort of like, yes, I know computers and I know a little bit of programming and I know how data works, but I'm not a programmer. And the terms that were being used, I was about 20 minutes into this workshop and I was completely lost because it was for programmers. So I know that's a challenge when you're covering such a wide area. So that being said on that topic, there's a lot of work that's been done out there with this linked data in terms of ORCID and MusicBrainz and DBpedia and VIAP and all that. If there's a way we could harness some of that so that, you know, when I look at the results in my discovery tool, I see the name showing up 5 times on the left-hand side as an author, it's the same person. Or as we would say in the cataloging world, there's no authority control there. If we could use that work that's already been done, instead of having that person's name, when you have that name, create the metadata with it that links it to ORCID, that links it to MusicBrainz for a music library, that links it to the appropriate linked data control vocabulary so that we have more consistency, we have more internationalness because those terms could be used internationally. And I think that would help improve our user experience, the accuracy of our data, the consistency of our data.
Okay.
Todd,
yes,
just
sorry.
to follow up on that same thing a little bit. So understanding what BibFrame can do is very new to me, but what I see is that it looks like it really does have the potential to expose library resources from open web searches. And so a couple of us in consortia who are here are excited about the idea of using that for electronic resources as well, and the representation of the access rights that's necessary in order to support using BibFrame to expose electronic resources that are differentially available for different institutions. That question is one that's now really buzzing in my mind because I think we're a lot of the way there, but the access rights part still, and communicating that in some way that can be determined and used in the BibFrame environment it would be a key next step. So that's one thing I think we have to think about. I don't know if there's a role for NISO there or not, but so kind of expanding BibFrame to electronic resources given the differential landscape of access and how that access might be appropriately communicated effectively so that it could be used by the major web search tools.
And to follow up on that, holdings availability. Right now, in all the different ILS systems, it's all proprietary, or a lot of it's proprietary information, and getting kind of standards for that would be very interesting.
Let's see. Some other. Oops. Hard to do with one hand. The issue of, well, I guess we covered some usability, user interface issues. From the vendors in the room, specifically, not to call you out, what kind of issues do you have that would make your lives easier in providing the services that you provide? Or let's see.
I got Steve here.
Scott?
Well, some of them I think are being solved. You know, still metadata is a huge problem for us. You know, just making sure that it's consistent. You know, edition to edition, vendor to vendor. The thing that's obviously a big problem for patrons and librarians is linking, broken links. And having those direct links from publishers is actually really, really critical. Open URL stuff is just too fragile. So those are the two things that come to mind.
I would agree on the metadata. One of the things that we discussed earlier was, for example, resource type definition, being clearer on, you know, what is an article, what's a review article, what is, you know, different resource types, because I think a lot of publishers defining this differently. It's sometimes very hard to, you know, convert this into something useful. So that was one of the things that I think could be very useful. In terms of linked data, I think we need more use cases. We need more, like, what do you actually want to achieve with linked data? What do you want the user to see? That sort of thing. I would find that very useful to get this, you know, from different sides. Yeah.
So I have a very long list, but I'll share only a couple of things. I think confirming what Steve said, definitely the movement to direct linking is something that, you know, we have made available. We would like to see it move along more quickly. So I think, you know, addressing some of that pain point with linking is definitely top of the list. The other thing is, you know, I think we all talked about user interface issues and just the ability, I think there's some balance between allowing